Hi, good afternoon. My father is a builder. He started work as a carpenter in the 70s and he started Doran construction in the early 80s. And in 2012, we went and built my house and we really tried to push it as low energy as we possibly could. And based on that, I joined the company. And then last year in 2014, Pat, who left school in 1965, against his better judgment, I sent him with myself to Germany for 2 weeks. We did a 2-week course. Then I sent him on the Passive House Tradesperson's course. He did his first exam ever. He passed it, but then he said afterwards, "That's it, I'm done." Okay, so we decided we entered the market as low energy passive house builders. Because I was thinking, if we can get this to work, that with the new building regulations, they're looking for 60% improvement in energy efficiency over 2005. So every house built now has to be an A3 standard. So that got me thinking, if people have to spend the money on an A3 house, why not spend the money and make it a passive house? Because I just had the feeling that the money you were spending, we were actually now at the budget of a passive house. So in the summer of last year, we got this project, and during negotiations, the client was open to the approach. But they had a condition. We could go ahead and build it as a passive house as long as the cost was only marginally more than what they had to build under Part L of the regulations anyway. Okay, so we decided to go ahead on that basis. So what were the 5 things that made a passive house compared to what the regulations were looking for? So the 5 things that make a passive house: insulation, lots of it, no gaps in the insulation, and triple glazed windows. So basically, the heat cannot escape through the walls, through any gaps in the insulation, or through the windows. So you can sit with your cup of coffee in the winter, stand by the windows, look out, and be completely warm and comfortable. And the last 2 things to make a passive house are air tightness, so you don't have to keep constantly reheating the air. So you don't have any air leakage, no drafts. But if you're doing that, you have to introduce mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. So you extract the stale, warm air, you pump in the fresh air, which recovers the heat from the stale air you just pumped out. Okay? So in this house, in terms of passive house insulation, a passive house has to have a U value of 0.15 watts per meter squared Kelvin or less. According to the department regulations for a house of this type, the floor should be 0.15, the walls should be 0.14, and the roof should be 0.12. So it looks like the regulations are actually at passive house level already. No gaps in the insulation. We now have to follow the acceptable construction details. We can't have any gaps in the insulation. This is a good one from the department. You have the insulation under the floor, meets an insulated block, meets the insulation in the cavity. We decided to go with something that was a bit more radical. It's called an insulated foundation. The insulation goes underneath the concrete, underneath a ring beam which supports the wall, and then touches the insulation on the outside. It was my idea, it wasn't Pat's. I came to him when I said it, and he said, "No way, that's just going to cost a fortune." So I went and priced it up, and I went back to him and said, "It's 4,000 cheaper." I still don't care, I've done strip footing all my life. We're not going to be the first ones to go do this, and it's my name. No way. Okay, so I said, "Fine, will we do the 4,000 dirham one then?" And he went quiet. He said, "It is a lot of money." So There he is there, doing it. And we went ahead. The walls, according to regulations, had to be 0.14. But the method they suggested of doing this was insulation in the cavity and this insulated board. We see this the whole time the plan's coming into price. It's an awful detail. You're splitting the insulation, you're paying for it twice, and you're losing the thermal mass of the walls. We decided to go with external insulation. It's usually a bit more expensive, but because of the high cost of the insulated boards, the labour, and because we shopped around, it worked out at 3,000 cheaper on this one. The roof had to be 0.12, and they suggested this method of complying, putting rigid board in between the rafters. Rigid board costs a fortune. It's not good with wood, because wood moves. It's impossible to get the proper seal in it. We suggested instead going with mineral wool to a greater depth in between the rafters. Achieved the same U value, better job, and was also €4,000 cheaper. Triple glazed windows. For a house of this type, the department guidelines said use triple glazing. So already, in all the surfaces, the floor, wall, roof, windows, the department, Part L, is calling for a passive house. Air tightness is the big difference. Department guidelines is 5 air changes per hour, roughly. What that means is the air in your house changes 5 times in an hour, meaning it has to be reheated every 5 times in an hour, back up to 20 degrees on a cold winter's day. If we were to do that on the house we were building, even with the money spent on the insulation, the triple glazing, no cold bridging, the heating cost of the house was going to be 1,200 quid. The passive house is all the way down there at 0.6 air changes per hour. And when I went back down to 0.6, the house cost 400 quid a year to heat. But then you have to spend the money on this stuff, all the membranes and tapes. But when I add it all up, it's 1% of the total bill cost, which the client accepted as marginal. And when we were doing it, the guys who always do this work for us told me they often work on schemes of houses where they put this stuff in, do the exact same job as for a passive house, and then the plumbers and the electricians come in and just cut it all out of the way. And I said, well, what does the builder say? And he says, oh, it doesn't matter, the target's only 5 air changes per hour, so it's okay. So they're actually spending the money and not getting the value. And to avoid that problem, what we do on every job is I'll just get the plan, I'll make a list of everything that has to go into the house, I'll draw lines, work out what's the best way to get it in, make a plan for it, do it, it takes me half an hour, and we don't have plumbers or electricians coming in and cutting through the tapes or drilling holes. I just show them where everything's left out for them. Build tight, ventilate right, is what they say. When I was building my own house, I just wanted a warm house. So insulation made sense to me, air tightness made sense to me. The heat recovery thing didn't. I thought you have to change the filters on it. Some guy has to come in and service it. Like, I have to service my car, and I'm going to have to do this as well. So I said, no way. So I went with these wall vents. And what happened then was we moved into the house. It was really warm. It was really cosy. But in the winter, I'd say to people, come up, and they went, oh yeah, it is really warm. But you open the window, it's really stuffy in here. The house was just not comfortable because we were not getting the air changes in the house. So I put it in afterwards, and it made an enormous difference to the house, the feeling of fresh air in the house. But the real danger is, and I saw it even the other day, a house came into price. The target was 2 air changes per hour to get the house past Part L, because they were going for an oil boiler, and he specified the wall vents. And that's the real danger going forward, is that we're going to build these houses tick the boxes for the BER, and then there's no joined up thinking between ventilation, air tightness and insulation.
70% of new homes, according to SEAI's data, while the average new home is meeting the kind of U value specs you're talking about, 70% of them have that kind of ventilation at present, the ones that are being built to the current regulations. So that's a time-bombed problem.
I think so. Okay, so we installed mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. That's it. You see the two grey things on the front? You just click them out every 2 months as you're doing the hoovering, give them a hoover, click them back in, and then replace them every year. It costs $6,500 to the client. But when we looked at the heat and plumbing quote of $18,000, we could get that down to $12,000 if we put in heat recovery, because instead of needing 20 radiators, we would only need 8. There's also the extra cost for renewables under Part L. Because the client had their heart set on an oil boiler and rods, and there was no shaking them from that, when I went to Part L compliance, they had to put on 120 solar tubes, which was 3,000 extra. A 1,000 litre buffer tank, which was another $3,000, and the extra cost of installation was another $1,000. So a total of 7,000 extra to comply with Part L. So in summary, the house built to the passive standard cost $2,900 extra for air tightness, $6,500 for heat recovery, a total of $9,400, and £400 a year to heat. House built to department guidelines, $4,000 extra for the floor, $3,000 extra for the wall build-up, $4,000 extra for the roof build-up, $4,000 extra for heating, $7,000 extra for renewables, a total of $22,000, and will cost €1,500 a year to heat. And this is my point. Are we now presented with, if we don't go with the passive house standard, a lost opportunity where we spend all the money and then to comply with nearly zero energy and EU regulations, we have to go back and do it all again in 10 years. So that's the house and plans. That's the way it turned out. 15,000 saving following a passive house spec, a BER of A2, and a house built to the highest energy standard in the world. Okay?